please find some seat and we'll start in 30 seconds. Thank you. So it's my pleasure to welcome you here today for the, I would say, the first session of this morning. It's my pleasure to welcome Rebecca Taylor from Secureworks. That's the topic of today will be related to knowledge management and communication and intelligence. Rebecca is coming from Secureworks, a company I've known for many, many years, and I'm sure this will be of great interest for her. And so prepare your questions for the end of the session, if you have some, because we'll be keeping some time for open questions. Thank you. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm glad that people actually came. That's quite reassuring. Welcome to my presentation on knowledge management, nourishing and enhancing your communication and intelligence. Oh, there we go. My name is Rebecca Taylor. I've been at Secureworks now for 8 years and have recently been nominated for a Women in Tech Excellence Award. I work in the incident response team, so working with our incident commanders as their knowledge manager. And over the past 18 months, I've been focusing on getting a series of qualifications. So you can see there my GSEC and my GISF. Outside of work, I live in London with my husband and my 2 kids, and I'm a graduate of the University of Portsmouth, having studied English and creative writing. So maybe a slightly different angle to some of you folks here today. So I want to get straight into the nitty-gritty. I'm here today to talk to you about knowledge management, the peaks and the troughs, the highs and the lows, how to push your teams and your intelligence to the max. I want to start by saying that knowledge management is something that is constantly evolving. At least in my role, I am always finding new things I want to capture, new ways to capture it, new ways to share that and teach that out to the people I work with. So if something today does sow a seed in you and you do find this of interest, or maybe you already know that you need to go back to your organization and solve your knowledge management issues, then there is so much information out there for you to learn from. So go out there, do your research, and of course, if I can help, you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can have that conversation. I also want to say that I have seen knowledge management done in some fantastic ways and some very innovative ways, but I've also seen knowledge management struggle. So I'm hoping today I can sow some seeds in your mind and help you share some of the lessons that I have learned along the way. So what if I told you that making a decision to start small and capture one nugget of information changed the way that I work? What if I told you that as an IR practice, by deciding what was important to us, documenting it and sharing it with others, it's changed how we function? Today, through this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of how knowledge management works, how it looks and feels, and then from there, I'm going to share with you some real-life examples of what I do in my role. So we'll start with this quote: "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest." So that was said by Benjamin Franklin. So knowledge can come in many different forms. It can be quantitative, so we're basically talking numbers, trends, statistics, or it can be qualitative. So in that sense, it's things like playbooks, processes, procedures. Whatever the type of knowledge it is, it's important that you invest your time, understand what knowledge you have, what's available to you, what you need to be successful, and what you need to be able to grow and learn. By investing, starting small, investing in those small elements, you can gain new knowledge piece by piece, and maybe at some point even have a functioning knowledge base. So if we start at a high level, what is knowledge management? So knowledge management is the process of more effectively collecting, sharing, maintaining or managing, and deploying organizational knowledge. It tends to come in 3 different forms. So there's explicit knowledge, and that is our formal or codified knowledge. So for a lot of you, that's going to be your playbooks, your processes and procedures. There's tacit knowledge, which is harder to explain, harder to teach someone, but it's about being able to think intuitively, being able to be innovative, being able to understand body language. And then there's implicit knowledge, which I think is our safe space where a lot of us are. And that is things that we already know, that's in our minds, but we haven't quite found the right way to capture it or share it out to others yet. So as I said, I think that's where a lot of organizations sit, particularly if you've been doing knowledge in a certain way for a long period of time. So thinking about knowledge, you can see the circles there. They are some examples of knowledge. So it's basically our information, our intelligence, and our facts. So examples could be, and I've said it a few times, processes and procedures. It could be our data points. It could be customer feedback, and maybe you do results from questionnaires. And they all feed into our knowledge base. So a knowledge base is a self-service repository for information on a particular product, subject, or service. So some organizations can have multiple knowledge bases, or you may just have the one. For me, my knowledge base that I use, we call it the Major Incident Response Plan, and it's our safe space, it's our hub, it's our knowledge base, where we keep everything the incident commander team need. So in there, it's our documented processes and procedures. We have templates. Templates are a big thing. You will have pre-built information they can share with customers, and that's our knowledge base. But in our organization, we also have several others, for example, that HR or maybe branding might use. At the end of all of that is the user. So knowledge management is very much the circle of life. So you've got a user that's not only using your searchable functional database, your knowledge base, but they're also feeding back. Maybe they spot a gap. Maybe something you've got is incorrect. Maybe they create something of their own and they want to give it back to you. So it's very much a loop with knowledge, and that's where you get that nourishment. I do want to stress that, and I do talk about it later as well, but this is where reward and recognition kicks in when you've got users that are engaging and are feeding back into the process. Wrapped all around this is framework. So the framework will decide and help you plan how you're going to manage, control, apply, and monitor that information. So in there, it may be things like access controls, change controls, all those kinds of things. If we think about framework a little bit more, there are a lot of frameworks available to you. So some of you will be familiar with ITIL. There's a knowledge management process model by Botha, which is much more about understanding the human and their requirements, and then you slot technology into that. There's also another example of the knowledge management matrix by Gamble and Blackwell. So that one is far more theoretical, but it's built around the concept of applying, deciding, and acting. Whatever framework works for you is okay. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. But when you are picking a framework, it's important you consider these 4 items. So your content, your people, your process, and your technology. So from a people perspective, you don't want to create a knowledge base that then slows everybody down or doesn't work from a search perspective. So making sure it is making a difference, having that measurable increase is important, and it should connect people. So say, for example, I looked up a piece of material, I could see where it came from, who's the associated SMEs. From a technology perspective, it's not about going out there and buying a really snazzy, expensive tool. It's often about looking at what you already have and seeing if that can work for you. I think for a lot of people, knowledge management, they think they need to go and buy something, when actually there's a lot of tools we all have that we just don't utilize necessarily in the right ways. From a content perspective, you need to be able to foster knowledge creation. There needs to be a mechanism for sharing that, and it should all intertwine with a lovely, rich user experience. And I said about it earlier, but having that reward and recognition is really important. So if you've got folks investing their time, they're creating new materials, they are helping you along the way to create a really good knowledge base that your company, your colleagues can trust, you should reward and recognize those people because they didn't have to do it. And finally, process. So that's where we're going to be thinking more about access controls, maybe change controls, but it should also intertwine with the process of if someone spots a gap, how does it trigger to create new relevant content? If you've got a contacts list in there, what's the trigger, what's the mechanism for saying, okay, that person's left, how are we going to know to go and update that? So when you're deciding what framework, do your research, pick what is applicable to you and to how you want to work, what you want to store, but just think about these 4 points. So, as I said, there are a lot of frameworks available, and there are a lot of tools. Some of them include content management, but that is very much a different conversation. But you should also be thinking about master data management. So master data management is the concept of having a single source of truth. So somewhere that is kept safe, it's collected, protected, stored as master data. So for example, other users can't overwrite it. In some instances, maybe you're a small organization that isn't so much of a problem. Within incident response, we're all collaborating constantly, so it's okay for people to go in and make tweaks as they see new things. But if you have a far larger knowledge base, you may need to consider master data management. And again, there's a lot of information out there to help you scope appropriately and to figure out the right knowledge management base and process for you. Regardless, every transaction, every piece of knowledge must be reliable and it must be trustworthy. If you start allowing information to filter out into your system that isn't trustworthy, you're going to drive people away from using it. So making sure that you have reliable information in there, maybe doing some auditing, at least on a quarterly basis, is a good behavior to have. Small changes can make a very immediate difference. So for me, when I started in my knowledge management role in IR, we didn't yet have a consistent way of being able to categorize and label our incident types. So I started about 2 years ago for our incident command team, labeling the incidents that came through the door. And I'm now in a position where I'm able to see those peaks and troughs, the trends, what exactly is happening in our incident command team. So whilst that feeds into some really lovely reporting and some statistics, what it does mean is that as a knowledge manager, I'm able to go, okay, this is what my team need. We're doing maybe more ransomware incidents than we're doing DDoS attacks. So let's make sure the content we create that's in our searchable knowledge base is maybe heavier on that side. Let's make sure we have more project plans. Let's make sure we have more customer-facing materials focused on that topic, because that's the drive. That's where we're seeing a lot of effort. And I'm now in a really lovely position where by making that small change, it's enabled us to see that actually it is worth the investment, it is worth the time. And now we're looking at that across the entire practice because we know it's important. So small changes can make an immediate difference to how you function. And I've said it already, but often we have tools and methods in-house and we just don't know enough about them. So making sure when you're scoping and deciding what tool you want to use, make sure you just understand before you go and buy something really expensive and snazzy with all the bells and whistles on it. So like anything, there's always going to be barriers to making it successful. So I'll touch on some of these here with you. The first one is privacy. So like anything, if you're collecting and storing certain pieces of information, there can be privacy concerns. Maybe you don't want it to be accessible to certain people. Maybe there's additional storage requirements. So doing a full privacy scope when you're heading into knowledge management is critical, because if you don't do that in the beginning, you could just end up spending a lot of time creating something really beautiful for it then to be taken back down. Another one is motivation. So believe it or not, a lot of people really, really can't be bothered to sit down and write down everything they know. They've been performing in a certain way, maybe they've worked in IR forever, and then me walking up going, can you write that down? No, because I already know. So having the right motivational points, being able to explain why they should do it, having leadership buy-in, again, reward and recognition can all help motivate your colleagues, your team members in the right way to share and document their knowledge. And finally, change, which I guess does link with motivation. But I'm sure all of us here have experienced change adversity, that fear of having to shake things up and do things differently. So again, having leadership buy-in, being prepared to explain why it's important, providing training and material to support people through change if you're deploying a new knowledge base, will all again lead to it, hopefully, being a successful transition. So knowledge is of no value unless you put it into practice. So we've spoken about the fundamentals. We've spoken about how you can pick a framework, but it has to work for you. We've spoken about challenges that you can face along the way that you should be considering. But how do we put all of this into practice, particularly from a cybersecurity and IR perspective? What examples or practices do we have to demonstrate how it works? And how can we do all of this before an incident happens? The last thing you want is to be in an incident and then your consultants, your team members are going either rogue and creating their own materials, or they can't find what they need. There's a lot that you can do in advance by having a stable knowledge base. So I'm going to put on my knowledge manager hat, and I'm going to share with you what I do, what I've learnt, what I prioritise. So I've already touched on the fact that proactively, I look after our major incident response plan. So that's the safe space, that's our knowledge base, where our incident commanders can go in and search what they need to be successful and to deliver to a customer. On the other side of that, my role is to work reactively during an emergency incident. So with that in mind, during an emergency incident, these are the three things that I personally prioritise. It's communication, work streams, and data capture. So communications, you have to get it right. It is critical. If you don't set yourself up to have the right visibility from the beginning, you're going to miss your little gems of knowledge. Work streams. With work streams come roles and responsibilities, accountabilities of those that are supporting you during your IR engagement. So having, again, those set up, socialised, is important. And finally, data capture. So that's going to touch on things like templates, but it's also going to focus on making sure that what you do capture can be quickly ingested. There's no point having all these lovely templates and forms if they're in a completely different format to actually what you need to be able to turn it into knowledge and intelligence. So thinking more about communication, a lot of what happens with communication needs to be very much protected and stored appropriately. If you don't set it up right from the very beginning, you will not have the right visibility you need, nor will you have the right protective capabilities. So within communication as a concept, you're going to see things when you're working with a customer, such as approved communication plans and structures. Who do I talk to about what and when? You're going to see the boundaries for delivery. So as a team, what can we work up till? And then when do we need to go back to the customer to ask for more or to ask for permissions? You're going to see things like escalation procedures and critical findings. Who do I call at 3 in the morning when an alarm goes off or when we find something? You're going to see contacts, including reasonable adjustments. So that is one that I'm particularly passionate about that I will share with you in a few slides' time. You're also going to understand reporting mechanisms. So as part of communication, different stakeholders, different individuals will have reporting needs. They need that visibility themselves to know where they are, maybe how many hours they've used, maybe how much money they've spent. And so having the right reporting mechanisms in place, knowing what they need, is again important to having a successful communication pathway. 3 that have become more and more common and that we see much more are governance, legal, and insurance. So again, I'm sure they're words or concepts that you are very familiar with, but in IR, they're very much coming to the forefront and teams that we're having to engage with and be prepared to work with. So touching on those, whether from a governance perspective, you're having to be prepared for disclosures, you're having to implement appropriate techniques for data handling. Maybe from an insurance perspective, you need to be on a panel so you can deliver to your customer. You need to have sales in place. You need to understand the caveats of any agreements your customer has with their policy provider. Maybe from a legal perspective, you need to work under privilege, or you need to be prepared to work with law enforcement or even for litigation. All of these kinds of things can be prepared in advance. From an insurer perspective, you can have those conversations. You can know what reports they would like and how they want it. You can have pre-built sales for engagement. From a governance perspective, you can have notification templates drawn up so as and when it's required, you can pull it out of your knowledge base and your team are good to go. Legal-wise, you can have ways already of engaging with law enforcement. And again, those materials pre-built so everyone knows where to go and what to use when they need it. So whilst these work streams, I suppose, can feel quite daunting for what they represent, a lot of what happens with them can be pre-discussed, pre-approved, and you can be in a much safer space when you're in the heat of that incident. So moving on to work streams, this is just an image that we use at work. So we mainly use Microsoft Teams as a safe space to collaborate with our customers. And you can see there under the Teams channels, they're typically the work streams that I set up and work with. So what's quite nice about having this image is you can see under each one, there's that standardized workstream framework. So, for example, if I have a consultant working with me, they're in the forensics workstream, forensics workstream, then they know their roles and responsibilities, they know the expectations of them for being in that workstream. They know that there's templates they have to fill out, for example, an indicator of compromise tracker. They know that maybe they have to fill out a time card tracker. Maybe under communication, everyone that works with me knows that if you go to communication, that's where you're going to find that communication plan, any pre-agreed prerequisites the customer has. So by having work streams, you're able to assign those roles and responsibilities as long as you socialize it. So again, those that then work within those streams know the expectation of them. And as knowledge manager, if I need to find something, I know exactly what work stream to go to, exactly what template to use, because it's all been pre-agreed, it's all been pre-templated, and it's already been socialized. So going on to templates, there's various templates you can use, and it's very much down to what's important to you and what you want to capture. But as I said before, it's important that when you're building a template, you think about how it's going to be ingested and used at the other end. There's no point building a really elaborate, lovely Excel spreadsheet if then you have to rip it all apart at the other end to try and get the good stuff out. So knowing the start to finish, scoping what you're making and who's going to use it is important for them being successful. But some that we use here, we've got time trackers, we've got those indicator of compromise trackers I spoke about, task trackers, but one I just want to touch on is the contacts and reasonable adjustments form. So that one's been a bit of a game changer for us because it not only collects more of the formal knowledge we need, so who are we working with, who do we escalate to, but it also allows people to share any reasonable adjustment requirements. So by that I mean, examples we've had is we've had customers come back to us and say, oh, I've never been asked that before, but actually in our team, several of my colleagues are colorblind. So can you make an adjustment just to the colors you use in any materials you give to us? Absolutely. Now we know, and we can work better and more collaboratively. I think in IR, being able to work more collaboratively is what's going to make it successful. We've also had examples of people saying, can you use a larger font? Can you use more graphic presentations than giving me lots of words because I find it harder to process? So again, having those reasonable adjustments has been a bit of a game changer in the way that we work. So when we think about knowledge and intelligence, these are the questions I tend to ask myself, at least on a quarterly basis. I touched on earlier that knowledge is constantly evolving and changing. So being able to look at your knowledge base and say each time, has it evolved? Has it changed? What else do I need is important. So these questions, what information do we need to be capturing and where? How can this benefit both or other organizations? What are the work streams and my expectations of them? How do we collaborate? How do I connect the dots? So as I said, making sure you're thinking of those as you're making changes or checking in with yourself that what you're doing is right still for your team is important to allow knowledge and intelligence to be successful. So going back to putting my knowledge management hat on, I want to share with you how doing all these things, being aware of these frameworks, being aware of these behaviors, has fed into our own knowledge management success. So you can see here, we've got a lot of different knowledge or intelligence points in our organization. So to put it into context, we have around 1,400 IR engagements per year, around 5,300 customers. We look at about 3 trillion events a week, and we have around 9 petabytes of client telemetry. So that's a lot of information. Obviously, you may be sitting here thinking, well, I have more. That's lovely. But for us, that's a lot of knowledge to be looking after and to be filtering and using in the right ways. So that can be dark web searches, that can be stuff coming out of IR engagements, it can be research. But whatever it is, we need to make sure that we are fostering it and filtering it to the appropriate people. So as I said, you may be sitting there thinking, yeah, we're relatively similar. We look at the same kinds of things. But what could it become if I spent the time on building an appropriate knowledge base? What could I gain? Where could these gems, these little nuggets of information go? So for us, we began working with a really fantastic organization called Ripjar. And we created TIMS, which is our Threat Intelligence Management System. We needed a way to store our threat intelligence, We needed to make it useful for both our teams and our tools. And we needed a structured way to support all those differing knowledge points. So we started with a focus on mapping telemetry and the data points we had, which then fed into the workflows to support data access, normalizations, and customizations. So really starting to think about how we could nourish and improve what we already had at our fingertips. From there, we began to pull data from other sources. So that is things like intelligence, telemetry, other enrichments, because we really wanted to add weight and maybe more context to what we already had. And then we wanted to make it searchable and accessible. So as I said earlier, having a knowledge base where people can trust it, but they can move around it, it's accessible, it's easy to use, is what's going to make it a successful knowledge management system. From there, as I said earlier, it's the circle of life. So we wanted to make sure that when people are gleaning intelligence, new information, that we're feeding it back into what we do. So that's where it fed into quick ingestion. And so this indicator of compromise importer was created. It's just a smoother process for getting that information in. And then it allowed our teams, so IR, maybe the counter-threat unit, to be able to connect the dots between engagements. So that, I think, was a turning point where then people saw the weight of what they could actually learn and actually see. And often in our IR engagements, this can be a turning point when we're using TIMs. So, for example, an indicator of compromise is uploaded. It's compared to the intelligence we have and nourished. And then it might go, oh, yeah, we've seen that before. That's this threat actor. Or we've written tips about that before. Or, oh, it was on this other engagement. So as a consultant, as a knowledge manager, I can go, oh, okay, I can go and talk to my colleague and see what happened. What was their report like? Maybe it can help you predict what might happen next. From there, I think like most organizations, we thought, yay, let's automate. And so we began focusing on automating our briefings, our profiles, which are on our customer-facing website, and just the way we really collected data. And then from there, we went on to enhancing our API streams and accessible knowledge browsers. So one there that's really important to me is to the left-hand side, and that one is called Elmo. And the beauty of that is if we have a customer, say we found out it's a particular threat group, we can go into that space. It's a safe space where we have pulled out anything like indicators, and it will show things we can immediately share with the customer. So it filters out from the main TIMS knowledge base into this Elmo browser. As an engagement, or during an engagement, it just adds that weight to be able to say to a customer, we know what we're talking about. Here's some materials you can read, and as an IR consultant or knowledge manager, I know it's already safe. So that's one that's really special. So going right back to where we started, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. So by making small changes, capturing what's important to your organization, your cyber efforts, and your customers, you can gain interest in many, many ways. And more amazingly than that, you can do so much of it in advance. So if you're going to take a picture, this is probably the slide to grab. So you need to understand what you want to collect now and what you do with it. Understand what you want to collect and why you don't. What's the plan? What's the framework? What's the mechanism? Do you have a tool? You need to templatize the basics to allow for consistency. You can do it in advance, and then it won't be in the heat of an incident. You must prioritize strong communication, work streams, and data capture. And take small steps. It isn't about going full in, we need knowledge management, let's do everything we possibly can immediately. It's about those small initial changes. And it's not about expensive tools. Understand what you have, start there first. Knowledge is power. Knowledge shared is power multiplied. Phew, okay. Thank you very much for your time today. I'll open the floor up to any questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Is there any any question in the audience, so you can ask for more details from Rebecca? Question, anyone?
I'll wait for you all to ping me on LinkedIn later. That's fine.
What I can say that what I like in your presentation is it started from a very general point of view, and then at the end of it, you can focus and really make it actionable for your teams, and you also insisted a lot on the, I would say, on the human, on the people aspects, which is also something I believe is very important for our team. So thanks for these details and insisting on that.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and have a really good first. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll make a short break, 10 minutes break. And oh, sorry, I didn't see Andrew.
Start with small steps. Sorry, Andrew Cormack from JISC. Would that be, for example, one arm of your big spider diagram? So, well, we do threat intelligence, or we do legal, or how do you start slicing the cake?
I feel like we're going to sing to each other.
Yes. No.
So I think it really depends on what's important to you as an organisation. So you can start small if you just identify something that's special to you. So maybe you need to get that leadership buy-in first so that they invest and they want to go down the knowledge management route. But of course, if looking at that spider diagram, you thought, yeah, I want to start with threat intelligence, then that's absolutely fine to do that too. It really is down to what you want it to be and how you want it to work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No more questions, really? Okay, so let's take a short break, and we'll be back in less than 10 minutes for the next presentation related to ransomware by Vishal.